Good day guys, my name is LordTomos and welcome again to LordTomos Comic Pick. For those of you who may or may not know about the comic book industry, even though you're an absolute beginner, an intermediate person, or more or less a hardcore fanatic in the more or less the know-hows of the comic industry, you might have picked up or caught wind that last weekend was actually Free Comic Book Day. Now basically in essence what it is, just before I get into the actual discussions of the comic that I'm going to more or less discuss with you guys, it's basically just for larger corporations just corporations in general of various publications like DC, Marvel, Image, Archie Comics, etc. to basically release a free comic for newcomers of the comic world or the comic industry. It's basically for them to say, hey guys, reading comic isn't bad. It's pretty awesome. It's pretty cool. And I can attest to that. I'm not the run-of-the-mill sort of looking guy that actually goes ahead and buys comic, but I'm actually quite an avid comic book reader. I basically went to my local comic store, which was the comic shop. I'll probably give him a link in my subscription, my little sub down there. And basically, it's a fun event to encourage people to come in, get a free comic. You're entitled to, well, it depends on the retailer, but you're entitled to 6 comics in total. And you can look around the store, you can pick up various statues, various busts, like little figurines and all that sort of stuff, and just embrace the comic book industry. And to be honest, it's quite an awesome initiative. It's been going on for a few years now, and to be honest, it's in my local comic store. It's really brought in a few extra customers. It's not my store, but I say customers for obviously the store, of course. Which brings me to my next point. The actual next comic I'd like to discuss with you is one that I've picked up recently. I caught wind of it. I rang them up and I said, hey guys, this is a title that I'm really interested in. Can you just put it aside in my standing order and I can't pick it up this weekend, or this weekend being last weekend? And they're like, yeah, sure, no worries. They were pretty intuitive in that sort of stuff. And the actual comic itself is called Suicide Risk by Mike Carney and Elena Kazagandi. I'm not even going to pronounce that. And it's from the publication Boom Studios. Pretty nice, all bag and board. Now I will show you guys obviously small snippets of the actual pages within, just to give you a more elaborate idea on the actual art style of the actual comic itself. Now it is a new comic that has been just released this month, so it hasn't been going on for like 50 issues, 25 issues, 12 issues or anything like that. It's just actually released today, this month. Now, the reason that I actually caught wind of this comic is because I'm always out there to look for the more vivid, more creative sort of comics, the more storylines that borderline kind of jumps the border and just gives you a swing of different things. Why I say that is because this actual comic, in my personal opinion, really captivated me in ways that you wouldn't necessarily do when you first pick up a comic. There were other comics that I picked up in Free Comic Book Day, which I will do later on, of course, and discuss those with you guys. But I especially wanted to talk to you guys about this comic in particular because, to be honest, it's becoming one of my all-time favorites, and it's only issue 1. Per the gnome, you're dealing with, in the story arc anyway, per the gnome, what you're actually dealing with is everyday civilians dealing with the confrontation of superheroes. By superheroes, they're actually referred as supers. That's what they're referred to, kind of like criminal masterminds. But in this universe, it's actually referred to as supers. Now, these supers were guys who were given the gift. Now, that gift is dependent on the individual. Super strength, force fields, telekinetic powers, that sort of stuff. Pardon me, and etc. etc. Now, the main protagonist here, the actual main guy here, he just deals with the general police force, and of course there was a robbery that occurred within his town, and he was there and dispatched with his squadron, his police team, to basically intercept and stop them from more or less destroying the robbery. Of course, many of his colleagues eventually did pass away, and to his disappointment, he became, I guess to an extent, a little traumatic. And you kind of have the confrontation of basically the ideology, where it even brings up in the comic, where it's like, we're just civilians. How are we meant to take on superhuman or superpowered humans? It's near impossible. We have guns and it seems to be doing nothing. Now, this is quite interesting in the sense that it really plays on that. It doesn't focus so much solely on the concept of supervillains, in the sense that, oh, you have one superhero, let us fly around and kick ass sort of thing. Even though it does play, homage and to the classic notion of that. By that I mean, you have supervillains, which are called supers, and you have even heroes. But what this comic actually tries to portray, tries to show you guys, is that no matter, well, it actually poses an interesting question before I continue on with that point. The more question is, if you were given the power, what would you do with it? A lot of you guys will say, yeah, I'll rob a bank, you always end up doing something sinister. Truth be told, if I had superpowers, I'll probably, cause a lot of mischief. I won't lie. I've that's crossed my mind a few times. And to be honest, a lot of people have thought about that. Whenever given the powers, does it ever come across to your mind where you're really saying, you know what, let's be heroes? It doesn't. A small percentile of people would, but the vast majority, truth be told, would tend to abuse and use our superpowers. That's the actual general theme, the general genre that this comic is going for. Granted, there have been other publications like DC and Marvel who have dandled with that idea. I totally understand this. This isn't an entirely new revolutionary idea. However, the major premise of this comic is solely based on that concept. Mind you, this is just their first comic, and it's already throwing you with the general conception of what the actual comic is more or less about, which is pretty hard to do for the first comic. Now, what they're going to be doing throughout the story arc of this comic, I'm not entirely sure. It's the first issue. Who knows? I can only imagine. But then again, who really knows? The actual major writer of this comic basically was a script writer. He partook in video games, etc. And he has kind of in-depth of idea what he wanted to do with his sort of general concept of this comic. And to be honest, I like where this comic is going. It's always asking, like any comic, you need to have a cliffhanger. You need to have I need to know what happens in comic 2, comic 3, or the overall story arc. And to be directly honest, this this actual artistic style, in terms of creativity, in terms of storyline, it really does it. Basically, you have a human, just an everyday civilian who was defeated by the supers and is pretty much chained down and unable to do much. So what would you do in that situation? All your colleagues have been dead, your best friend's dead. What would you do? In this instance, he wants to become just like the villains. However, he wants to use his power for the power of good. However, the general consensus is there are too many bad guys out there than good. So those who are good eventually do become bad, which it makes it quite apparent in a couple of panels in the actual comic itself. I know it's kind of giving away too much, but in the same way, it's enough for you to basically say, you know what, this is an interesting concept. However, that being said, the next more or less part is he encounters the guy who actually gives him the superpowers. You have to be A, compatible, and B, the power is awakened within you. However, the twist of this actual comic, which I think is quite intuitive in itself, and yes, granted, it is done in X-Men and possibly every mutant sort of aspect, but in twist, is the actual title is called Suicide Risk. What does that mean? Once your power is granted, once your power is triggered off you, the risk is you could have anything. You could have the fastest speed, you can be the strongest kicker, you can do lasers out of your eyes, or you could die every 3 days, or your skin will melt in the explosion of water. That's the risk. That's the kicker. Now, like I said, granted, Marvel has done that, played around with it. With the you have the good X-Men, you have lasers and all that sort of stuff, and you have obviously they dandled with a few X-Men that obviously had horrible abilities, which I get and I understand, but this kind of takes in a new twist. Now, the initial the initial writer of this comic made it quite clear that he really wanted to emphasize on that aspect. He really wanted to grow on that point. So as to how he does it and certain attributes, like the questions that I have is, because the end panel, I don't want to kill it for you, it appears that he dies. The main protagonist, the main guy, this little guy, he dies. So you don't know why he dies, you don't know what his abilities are. He could be he dies every 5 minutes, who knows, I don't know. And of course you just, it's the cliffhanger. You're like, well, where are these guys getting the powers? Who's manufacturing these powers? What's the initial concept of creating these powers and giving it to everyday humans? there was a lot of questions. And you know what? If a comic can give you a lot of questions and not enough answers for you to want to buy, comic number 2, you got me. And truth be told, that's how most comics are these days. Now, that being said, that's an interesting comic. Like I said, I know certain, publications obviously have dabbled on it, but I really feel that this comic in particular is really taken it to the next level, because the creative director of the actual comic said they really wanted to push that idea, which, to be honest, bravo to them. It's nice. Now, as I mentioned, the artistic style of this comic is very modern, if you can really say. I'll give you an example. Here you go. It's very it isn't DC or Marvel or anything like that, but it's very conceptual in the sense that it kind of relates to the modern world. It's not like big eyes, over exaggerated moves, and all that sort of stuff. And you know what? That's not bad. I'm not ditching those sort of comics. I have a few that I actually read, which I love, but it really toys with that idea. Here's an example of a superhero, or a super, as I like to call him, that has like capes. So it is pretty nice in terms of the concept. The only negative thing I have about this, and I think undermines what the overall comic is trying to give you and deliver to you, which I understand why they would, but in the same time, I don't feel that was necessary, is giving superheroes, these superpower guys, costumes. I'm like, truth be told, if I had the ability to be super strong, I'd just whack on a shirt, whack on some shoes and a bird and shorts, and away I go. I wouldn't necessarily bother with, a cane, suit, and all that sort of stuff. That's just me. It's a small nitpick, I get it. But I guess you could argue that this character is just playing it, smooth and that sort of stuff, which I get, which is awesome. But at the same time, I just feel like it wasn't needed, but at the same time, I understand why you need it. If you're a superhero and you're trying to save the world, I guess you want to be as showy as possible. There is another theme that this comic more or less themes is like, if you know the identity of these villains, why don't you just expose it to the public so nowhere could be hired? However, it doesn't really explain further than that point, which I can totally understand to an extent. You don't want to give away too much in the first comic, but you want to entice the reader to basically ask all these questions and say, let's get into it. So that's more chapters, more things about it. So it's definitely throws that concept out there for you guys. And obviously this is not going to kill it, but you can see obviously the birth of possibly the worst superhero ever, or the best superhero ever, which plays on itself. That's probably my biggest negative thing. Mind you, I can't really speak too much in terms of positive and too much negatives. I can only speak in the positive in the sense of what I hope this comic delivers in the future. I will be following this. Maybe I'll do an update further down the track. As far as negatives, the only real setback I have is artistically style. It's gorgeous. However, there was really no need for superhuman costumes, provided that they do something. And it's for example, if they wear a mask, the mask prevents them from telekinesis attacks. I get that, might need it, but if it's just there for aesthetics, I think it's stupid. But I understand why it's needed. I know this is going to annoy a lot of people. That's why I'm not a huge fan of Marvel and DC. I get why they have it, and by all means, I do respect them, and I do find them awesome, those costumes and all this stuff. Heck, I'm into Power Rangers, so, I can't really stand on the hypocrisy line and just say, superheroes in costumes is just stupid and retarded. I'm not against that. I think they're cool. However, when you're trying to deliver a certain story arc, I believe the artistic style and the creative style should reflect the story more than the story should reflect the characters, if that makes sense. That's just my take. I'm not a comic writer. I'm just a enthusiast that likes reading comics. That's my 2 cents worth of information just right there. So, like I said, nothing against Marvel and DC. I thoroughly enjoy it. I pick up a few, comics here and there. I'm just, not head over heels of having them dressed as a certain costume for the sake of just dressing as a costume. Yeah, I'll still read it. I'll still find it cool. It's just, you play with the idea sort of bit. So that's pretty much all that I can really say about this comic. It is issue 1. There is definitely a lot to say about it. I just really wanted to share this comic with you guys, to maybe if you want to pick it up and just check it out for yourself. It does have a lot to offer, I feel, in the future, and I feel that it definitely has something more to give to obviously the community and story-wise and that sort of stuff. If the interviews of the initial writer and the creative directors of this comic has anything to say to me, I think this definitely has potential. Plus, it's also nice to support, just another publisher, which is Boom Studios. There's no point in just going DC and Marvel and that's it. Try different publications. Different publications really broaden the horizon. Take Image, for instance. There's a few comics that I picked up that I'm like, what? No, I missed out on that. So yeah. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed talking about it. And if you have any questions, hit me up. I'm more than happy to help. If you have any request of comics, drop me a comment. I'll check it out myself, give you my 2 cents worth of information and that sort of stuff. Of course, we'll see what happens in the next week or next month. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching and peace.